Are you ready to take your business and technology knowledge to the next level? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of One Step Beyond Cyber. I'm Scott Kreisberg, and I'm your host on the channel. Now, before we get started, if you find any value in the content you receive today, do us a big favor. Give us a review and give us a subscribe. Now, let's get started, and I'll introduce our panel. Now, most of you guys know Tim Derrickson, because he's been on a lot of our previous episodes. Now, Tim is our resident certified information systems security professional. And what's that short for?
CISSP.
And Tim, you also hold the company record for acronyms. So let's try to keep that down to a minimum so our viewers can follow us. And on my left, Joseph Cook with the Arizona Group, who's got over a decade of insurance experience, and he too is a certified cyber risk manager, CCRM.
Got it.
Wow, I'm surrounded by all these certified folks. Going to help make me look much smarter. Now, today we're going to endeavor to get into the conversation of cyber liability insurance and some of the most common misconceptions, as well as how it can be the biggest godsend or a false sense of security. We'll see which one our viewers fall under. All right, but before we get started, Tim, would you do the honors of providing our podcast disclaimer?
Sure. The purpose of this podcast is to provide news and information on cybersecurity and technology law and regulations. And all data provided on this podcast is informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. And Roman's not here today, so I thought I'd say it for him.
And you did a great job.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. All right, let's kick off this episode. All right, guys, my first topic is going to be one that I think I hear most often is that this a one or another proposition? Like if, Joseph, if they have your CLI insurance, why do they need IT people? Why do they need security protocols? Why do they need that? And Tim, why don't you tell us conversely, if they have services like what we provide, they probably don't need Joseph, right?
They always need Joseph.
Okay, good. So let's start off over here. What say you?
Sure, I think that the two realms are forever going to be intertwined, right? Think of it as walking a tightrope. So I feel like the cybersecurity folks help the clients or customers walk that tightrope.
Okay.
And the cyber policy becomes that net underneath in case you do fall off, right? So it's really important that you learn how to walk a tightrope appropriately, but it's also really important that net underneath be appropriately rated, appropriately sized, and actually able to catch you if you do fall.
That's key. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Nobody wants to fall through the net.
Yeah. That's a great picture. So, what about you, Tim? What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting that, they're saying now that there are two companies, right? Those that have been hacked and know about it, and those that have been hacked and don't know about it. IT is there and security is there to put all these controls in place to make sure that you're doing the best job possible to stay secure. It's kind of like putting a lock on your front door, right? We're going to keep all the honest people honest. Then we're going to put a gate in front of our front door just in case there's some people who aren't as honest there that are going to try and break in. No matter how big the gate, sometimes on the other side, the person's bigger. And that's when your insurance comes in, because it does help. Yeah. It's what they will be intertwined from here on out. And I think what's interesting too is the way that they work together at this point.
Yeah, it's a good point. I really love the picture you conjured up there. So if most businesses are walking a tightrope and they fall because they fall into either of those two categories of a business that's been hacked and knows about it, or a business that's been hacked and doesn't know about it, eventually they're going to probably fall off that tightrope, and they look down and they're like, oh, I got a safety net, right? Is there, you said they were intertwined, these two areas, but can you kind of tell us a little bit about where they are intertwined and why it's important?
Absolutely. So as the cyber insurance market has developed over the last 25 or so years, right, we went from what was, for the most part, an artificial market where they'd ask you if you had a pulse and what your address was, and send you a quote for somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500. And when claims were limited and cyber criminals were less active, right? That was a feasible model for everybody involved. But with the way things that have changed, that's no longer a feasible model,
Okay.
right? And so what you've seen is insurance carriers become more sophisticated on what cybersecurity controls are, how they can be implemented, and they're starting to ask about those in the application process of trying to find insurance. And then they're using those controls as part of warranty statements and terms and conditions and policy language at the time of claim. So being compliant and not answering things in a speculative or hopeful manner, but answering things in a true manner is really going to be helpful at time of claim to increase likelihood of that claim being covered.
Great. And so, so from our perspective, how does working with a client that's maybe applying for CLI, do people like you help them with that process? And if so, maybe you could comment on, does it help with the premium price? So,
I think definitely, because when we get involved, especially when it comes to doing cyber liability insurance, we're actually the ones that are helping them read these forms, because it is technical. This is not something where it's laid out for them in not necessarily an easy manner, would be the way to say it.
It's very precise, right? It's not
It's
that
very
yeah.
precise, and
Yeah.
sometimes it can seem ambiguous if you don't understand the terms that you're looking at. Acronym man, we see acronyms in there that they might not understand. But even looking at just how backups are handled, are they air gapped? I mean, there are things that are said that the layman might not understand, because air gap would be what? It means that there has to be a gap between when you did your backup to when you saved it, and then there can't be a connection there for anybody to get back into that backup.
No persistent connection.
Correct.
Right.
So there's all little things that we help with, and we make sure that when Joseph gets that form, he looks down and he goes, okay, and it's a self-assessment, right? So we're going to do this ourselves, and it's going to be a little bit more precise of a yes or a no, or specific answers of why there's a no.
Right.
Are we using two-factor authentication for everybody in our business? No, we use Active Directory to log in internally, but anything, right, exactly. So the eyes glaze over, but Joseph understands it, or the broker or the insurance claim people.
Yeah.
And so then they're able to read it, and when something does happen, and it goes to them, they're able to come back and go, well, you said this.
Right. And on that note, thanks. And on that note, like, you guys, from your perspective, don't validate or verify prior to claim, do you?
No, generally they won't.
The attestation
there's a little bit of practice starting to emerge
Okay.
with things like Cylance or BitSite,
Okay.
which is ultimately like a credit score for your cyber hygiene done on a base level, maybe from a domain scan or something similar.
Okay.
So they might find compromised email addresses or potentially an open port or something on a simpler level, but there's not validation throughout the process, right?
Okay.
They're not going to come out and run an agent on your network to see if all these tools are installed and
Right.
configured the way you've described.
Okay.
So the value of having somebody like a one-step in your atmosphere kind of comes in two ways.
Okay.
The first way is that for the things that you are doing well to protect your entity and increase your cyber hygiene, you will receive some benefit on rate of your policy, terms and conditions, or both.
Mm-hmm.
The second value is being honest about the things that maybe you're not doing as well as you could be doing. Does bring value, because then you aren't tripped up at time of claim by a contradictory statement, right? At least you were honest up front and the carrier was fully aware that you didn't actually have 2FA, you just had Active Directory, right? So they cannot try to use that against you at a later date. So it brings value in two ways.
So you're saying it's better to be honest and transparent with the insurance company, so it doesn't come back and when you fall off the tight wire, that there is a net there for you.
Absolutely, and the legal
Okay.
precedent supports that, right?
Okay.
So if you look at the...
I was gonna say, could you give me examples? then?
Sure, yeah. So the only case that's ever been awarded by a judge and jury to the favor of the insurance carrier surrounding these types of claims, cyber liability claims, was a mid-sized employer, about 150 employees in the manufacturing sector, who indicated to Travelers Insurance that they had MFA fully deployed. They did not at time of claim. The reason that they were able to be breached was that lack of MFA. And when it went to court, the judge and jury actually decided in favor of Travelers.
Yikes.
So that dishonesty is the only, in single case to date, where a warranty clause has been in support of an insurance carrier to deny a claim.
Do you find that as we're moving forward, especially when we start dealing more and more with these breaches that are going on, and they are becoming more prevalent with cybercrime and syndicates, do you find that the insurance industry is starting to change to be a little bit more proactive in the fact, besides Cylance and those ones that you mentioned, that they would be moving towards some type of test for that client, or would it be a third party that might step in and go, this is what we've done to provide some type of scan to see what's going on?
Sure, I don't think they'll ever do it in-house, but I definitely know that there is some progress being made towards scanning on a pre-basis. Even with some carriers, they're talking about intermittent scanning, so they may do it on every other month or quarterly or biannual basis, right? So there's certainly talks of that, and I think that only benefits everyone. So to give you a great example of that, we'll be able to send a BitSite report to our clients, and we just sent one recently to an IT director that allows him to close 4 open ports and shut down a couple compromised email addresses. Wow. So that's helpful, right? And it's helpful that your insurance carrier or your insurance broker can provide that to you.
And will that help with pricing for when they're getting their rates?
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges with that pricing, right, is that in many cases, if you're receiving a credit or a debit structure, that's not going to be conspicuous. It's not printed on your policy anywhere. So you're going to have a level of trust with your broker that's bringing you that product to understand where your price is falling. But having closed ports and having non-compromised email addresses is certainly a greater level of security than the opposite. So yes, it could only do positive things to your rates.
Good?
Good.
All right, take over.
Oh.
No, it's great. Those are great questions. So, talking about coverage though, is this a one-size-fits-all type thing? And what should our viewers be on the lookout for when it comes to terms, conditions, understanding what they're really getting coverage on? So, assuming you fall off this tight wire,
sure.
How do we know the net's the right size? So that it's like super comfortable and they know they're going to be fine when they fall in it.
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is a younger insurance product, right? So there's still a lot of room for growth on our side. So some of the things that the insurance world is not doing well right now is uniformity of language. So there's a lot of carriers calling the same act different things, right? And that's very frustrating because you're trying to compare different policy products and really understand what it is that you're getting. And you may actually have that same line item, but they're calling it 2 different things. So it takes a lot of discovery to find that out. The second thing that is really important to note here is, insurance is very regulated, right? And it's a very large industry, and sometimes it's a little slow to make that tanker take a turn, right?
Right.
So a lot of your better insurance forms are based on what are called ISO or insurance service offices forms. So for your older coverages, general liability, in the marine, property, those are well established, and they're a baseline for all of the carriers. So you have that baseline you can expect from a coverage perspective. The challenge now with this young product of cyber liability and this very dynamic cyber risk that we're experiencing, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, right, is that an ISO form, being as regulated as it is typically well behind the curve of what's being experienced today and will be experienced tomorrow in cyber risk. So your best providers are non-admitted forms, which is kind of contrary to what is normally out there in the industry. But because they're non-admitted and they're less regulated, they're more able to be creative and more able to be nimble and adapt to that cyber risk. So you have this wild west where things are a little bit upside down in terms of non-admitted being more favorable than admitted at this time, right? And you also have just a absolute spectrum of variability and strength of coverage in terms and conditions.
So can companies use the generic type term form as well as their own, or how does that work?
They could, right? But if you're breaking down all of the cyber providers into, let's say, 3 tiers
Okay.
of competition. There's a standalone at tier 1, and I won't mention them for
Right.
now, but there's one company that sits alone in tier 1 for a variety of reasons. All your non-admitted carriers are essentially competing in tier 2.
Okay.
And then all your admitted carriers are competing in tier 3. We kind of jokingly refer to them as cyber light, right?
Okay.
So that ISO form is so restrictive because of regulation that it really is just not doing what it needs to do right now.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Thanks for that. All right, so the next topic I'd like to discuss is should clients have regular meetings with A, their insurance professional, and B, their IT or cybersecurity or compliance professionals? Tim, why don't you?
Yeah, it's actually yes to both.
Okay.
I know that we do quarterly business reviews with our clients. We touch them, well, not touch them because that might be bad. We contact them once a month for all of our clients to make sure that everything is going well. I think that anytime there's a change in your environment, you're changing your posture.
Mhm.
So if you add something in your environment, even to the point of some of these small businesses that just they put in a new router from their carrier, from their ISP, whether CenturyLink or somebody else, not to, and they put it in and all the passwords are on the bottom and they don't change. Every time you put that in, you change your security posture and you need to contact your IT person to make sure you're changing passwords, making sure you're going in and closing those ports and making sure that everything's set up the way it's supposed to be set up. But that also changes what you have in your environment for the insurance as well. So, and that could be anything from switches, routers, new applications can cause changes to your environment. It'll open ports sometimes, close ports other times. So yeah, you should be doing at least quarterly meetings, I know, with your IT people, if they're not in-house, but you should be at least speaking with them once a month.
Okay. And Joseph mentioned scanning being done, by some carriers. What about that with their IT folks?
Scannings should be done quarterly, in my personal opinion. Right?
What is a scan, by the way?
So a scan is going to go into, you're going to do what they call a vulnerability scan, which is going to go and look at all the things that we know of that is a possibility of a vulnerability or something going wrong in your environment that can be breached. So if you're doing it, once again, for me, best practice would be at least quarterly to go and look at everything, because every time you have an update with Windows, because we know they do updates on Windows, there could be a vulnerability. Anytime you add something new to your environment, take something out, you're changing things, you might be leaving ports open that you don't need to leave open. So you want to at least once a year do a scan to look at your environment, but I would say best practice at this point would be at least quarterly. And we have clients that do it monthly.
Good. Awesome. Joseph, what say you?
I would piggyback off Tim's comments in that when you're looking at cybersecurity, when you're looking at an insurance program, an attorney, any of these trusted advisor roles, right? You have to realize that the products or services that you're engaging those trusted advisors for are living ecosystems. They're dynamic, right? Things are going to change as your business changes. Whether you're shrinking, whether you're growing, whether you're exiting a vertical, entering a vertical, whatever it may be, all of those have impacts with your trusted advisors and those living ecosystems that you're building together. So I don't know that there's necessarily a mandatory level of communication as sort of quarterly or biannual or anything like that, but it should be an open line of communication with mutual respect and trust.
Yeah, I wonder if people view their insurance professional more as a vendor as compared to a business partner or part of their team, their advisory team, right? That's how I view those that I work with. Otherwise, they're just a vendor.
Sure.
So is that how you like to operate?
We certainly like to operate in the trusted advisor role. I think within any industry, there's going to be a certain base of clientele that will treat anybody like a vendor, and that's unfortunate, but it's a reality, right? I think ultimately what you're trying to elevate is the understanding that with these living ecosystems, with these complex products and services, you're not just ordering off a menu. These are not off-the-shelf products. These are custom tailored to fit your needs, right? And with that in mind, you have to understand that there's going to be a little bit more of a process. There's going to be a little bit more of an exchange as it relates to information on an initial basis and on an ongoing basis, right? Really understanding that helps you understand that the yield will be better, right, from that kind of process. If you give a trusted advisor 10% of the information that they need to do their job, you're probably going to get about 10% of a solution.
Right. That's like when people go to a doctor and they start doing diagnosis, right?
Sure.
And they don't disclose some information that would be quite pertinent, and then the doctor misses something, right?
Sure.
And it's really critical for people to view these two professions as a trusted advisor, as you said.
Yeah.
So.
And I also think that we also have to remember that nothing is set and forget anymore. It used to be, back in the day, our days, you put in your antivirus and you just let it run because it usually caught what you needed it to catch. Nowadays, you just can't set it and let it sit. You have to watch it. And I think that has to do with insurance as well, as you're making these changes in your environment to make sure that they know that you've made these changes as well, which could benefit you, right? I mean, you might do something that actually makes them happy and lowers your risk.
Yeah, it can go both ways. Business is dynamic, right? So, a business that, adds a location or adds a bunch of people, that's a greater risk for an insurance company. But it can go the other way, right? So if they forget to call their insurance company, if they've done something to reduce their exposure, then they're forgetting to let them know.
And not all risk is equivalent either, right?
Yeah.
So you got to remember that in the United States, we have states' rights, and every state has very different legal systems, very different perspectives on what might or might not be an employee, things of these nature, statutes of repose, limitation, all that good stuff. So when you think about what you do maybe here in Arizona and you wanted to expand it into, let's say, New Mexico or Colorado or Utah, it may not be the same level of risk simply because that state views what you do differently than the state of Arizona does. So don't be afraid to have these conversations.
Good point. Yeah, multi-state business is good. All right. Hey, so this last topic for me is interesting because from your side, from the insurance side, I'd love to see what your feelings are and what any experiences are that you have with self-insuring, right? Because a lot of times we hear with our clients, no, I don't need cyber liability insurance. I'm going to cover it for myself. And then, conversely, Tim, do you hear about clients that maybe have family members or, try to do things, let's say, a little bit more efficiently, let's say, or overly efficiently, but they might not necessarily, that's sort of self-insuring, right? Because they're not necessarily bringing a CISSP, a true educated individual that can look and try to solve things for the client. So let's start over here and see how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny that you say that because anybody who works in IT knows that their mother or their father is going to call them as soon as we walk out the door because something doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, no, there's we actually run into it where we can't get hold of people who were handling their IT before we became their partner.
Okay.
And then it takes us, it will take us days and sometimes months to run down configuration for things that should take us 5 or 10 minutes, now pushes us down the road on trying to get these things fixed for the client. So when you use someone who is not a professional, you're taking the chance of it not getting done right. And especially if we're going to say, once again, we'll do hand in hand, you have someone set up your router so that when they put in their claims or they're going to set up their self-assessment and they say, do you have a router in place? They say, check, I have a router in place. Is it configured a specific way? Check, of course it was. My brother took care of it, or my father, and I know that he does everything right. So then something does happen and then they get it, the insurance company gets it and goes, well, you said you did this, this, and this. And the guy goes, I did what?
I thought I did.
How did I do that? I don't know, so I mean,
yeah.
No, I don't think not everybody should be doing IT just because we know it. I shouldn't be a gardener. I mean, I can go out in the backyard and I can plant a tree, I can set up the water, I can get it to get to a certain spot. But when it comes to tending that garden, I'm not the best, and I'll be the first one to admit it.
Right. And and along that line, though, even if they say they have a family member or a friend of a friend or a nephew, cousin, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
That is a true professional. And if they're not actually engaging with them on an agreement,
Correct.
with expectations and all that documented, it's a family agreement, that's not going to hold
And that goes back
as well.
No, but that goes back to what we were just saying. You can't set and forget. You can't just set it up and go, here you go, this is now going to work for you exactly the way it's supposed to from day 1 to day 365.
Right. Good. All right. Self-insurance, right? There's a few. I've got a few dollars in the bank. And,
Sure.
CLI insurance. I don't know about you, but your company. But wait, you might do ours anyway. It's been going up every year. So
Sure. So self-insurance is absolutely a real thing. Let's start there, right? But the actual applications of it, whether it be a loss-sensitive program, a single-parent captive, a group captive, are sophisticated, time-consuming, and require a significant amount of actual cash on hand or capital, right? So when a lot of people, particularly small to medium-sized enterprises, are using the term self-insuring, they essentially mean I'm just going to keep that risk on my balance sheet. That's really what they mean, right? So that's a scary proposition when you think about how hard it is to be a small or medium enterprise owner, and how hard it is to grow that entity, and great respect to those people, right? So certainly not wanting to risk that balance sheet. So let's start with your standard cyber liability policy. That's $1 million policy. So unless you have $1 million of cash that you'd like to set aside solely for the purpose of responding to a breach event, you're really not self-insuring, right? Regardless of whether or not you're unhappy with the premium, which I could understand in some circumstances, right? Regardless of whether you're unhappy or have questions about your terms and conditions, you're really not going through the practice of self-insuring. You're just putting risk on your balance sheet. And one of the most important things to grow a small or medium enterprise is preserving capital and preserving that balance sheet. So the more you can do from an insurance perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, from a legal perspective, any of these trusted advisors, the more you can do within a budget that is aligned with market fare, let's call it, for these products and services, right? The better your balance sheet will be.
Excellent.
I think it also, and I think what's interesting about that too is the fact that when you start doing self-insurance, or when you start talking about this, when you start doing business impact analysis and looking at risk, we go to the actuaries, we go to the insurance people to find out the numbers. So I don't know how many times in Arizona that there's going to be a fire in our area. So what I have to do is I have to go to an actuary somewhere and go, okay, in our area, how often does a fire happen? And then I have to look at the cost of the building, I have to look at what the probability is inside. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. So if you are self-insuring, you really better understand the numbers.
What's funny is, it's a good point. What's really funny is self-insuring is actually still occurring because if people aren't truly honest and transparent when they're filling out that portion of the application,
Sure, yeah.
they literally just self-insured.
They've created risk on the balance sheet, right? And the other thing you have to understand too, right, is when you think about small and medium enterprises being the backbone of our economy and our country, you're not just risking your balance sheet, but you're risking jobs of your employees, right? You're really risking your community, not just your business. So it's really, really important that you protect that balance sheet.
All right. Well, this has been very, very informative for me. So I'd like to just give a brief summary of what we discussed. Guys, feel free to correct me if I know Tim will correct me. Anyway, so we've agreed that both CLI and your IT and security is important, right? That's
Not just important, but intertwined.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think at
Okay.
this point in business, in today's world, I don't think you can do without it, honestly.
okay.
Yeah.
Good. when working with your provider, your CLI policy coverage, you really need to have a business conversation with that person to make sure that the net is big enough and it's thick enough, and that you are protected to the degree you think you are being protected. Is that?
Absolutely,
Okay.
and there's lots of great information that any good broker in this space has to help you benchmark as well.
Okay.
What size that net should be, right? So we're happy to help.
Awesome. And then business being dynamic, constantly changing, right? You brought up all kinds of examples, switching out your cable modem or your router or ports, and all kinds of great stuff happening, adding and subtracting users. Any change, whether large or small, is an exposure. So you need to have a regular cadence of meetings with your trusted advisors, right?
Absolutely.
So we're in agreement there. All right, and finally, self-insuring is the way to go. No, so self-insuring, big decision. Definitely get into the nitty-gritty with your trusted advisor. Make sure you understand what you're doing and make sure you're truly covered. And regardless of family members, friends that are in the IT or security business, if you're going to work with them, fantastic. But you're doing a injustice to yourself if you don't make it official. Correct?
Absolutely.
All right, cool.
Agreed.
Awesome. So Tim opened this up with a great saying that there are two kinds of companies out there, right? One type that has been breached and knows about it, and the second type of business is those that have been breached and yet to know about it. So with that in mind, you guys, you need to be proactive, okay? Get with your professionals. Don't wait for your renewal to show up and just write a check and pay it. Take an hour or two and meet with your professionals and your IT professionals as well. All right, guys, that's going to be a wrap for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Just a quick reminder, review, subscribe, and until next time, I challenge all of you to keep on learning. Bye-bye.